The damba drums reached their crescendo at midnight, and the bone behind Azindo's left ear began to crack. Not literally, not yet. But the pressure building in the ley lines beneath Ironhaven translated through his shadow, binding as a physical weight against his skull. A dense, hot compression that tasted of copper and old smoke. The Harmattan air carried the smell of roasting groundnuts from the festival above and the mineral tang of something older, something rising from the deep stone where the Zagale had built their infrastructure millennia before anyone thought to celebrate the alignment with drums and dancing. His shadow bridge to the real skin blazed. The connection that had been a cable became a pillar, thick with ancestral resonance, vibrating with a power that made his teeth ache and his vision swim. The real skin beneath the corrupted copy was surging. The ancestral bond, dormant for 14 months, buried under Tohaje's false pattern, weakened by 7 candidates' stolen life force, was feeding on the alignment's amplification the way a starving man feeds on the first meal after famine. Desperate, greedy, alive. They descended. Pugna Zara led them through the earth-bonded's emergency passages. The red laterite walls glowed faintly, the geometric patterns carved into them centuries ago now readable to his shadow, a genealogy of every chief who had ever sat the skin, their names warm against his consciousness like handprints left on sun-baked clay. The air in the corridors was thick, humid despite the harmattan outside, carrying the vegetal sweetness of roots growing through ancient masonry. Ahead, Zuera and Tibigia. Zuera held Mariama's smock against her chest with both hands, the encoded textile alive with the alignment's amplified encoding frequency. The density was extraordinary. Azindo's shadow, reaching past Zuera toward the chamber ahead, felt the encoding as a solid wall of information, a flood of patterns so dense that any capture mechanism would need seconds to process it. Seconds, that was all they had, that was all they needed. Behind him, Kofi walked with his signal dimmed. WuDon walked beside Samini, her palms open at her sides, her communion connected to the guardian below. Samini carried his petrified staff, his weathered hands steady around the ancient wood that smelled faintly of camphor and rain. 7 people descending into a chamber where a god waited with a trap. The ceremonial steps, 3 levels down. The alignment's energy intensified with each level, the cosmic amplification focusing as they descended, channeled by the chamber's architecture into a concentrated beam. The Enskinment chamber was not just a room. It was a lens, a focusing mechanism designed by the Zagale to gather the alignment's cosmic energy and direct it through the Enskinment bond. Tonight, the lens would focus on 3 competing bonds simultaneously: the true Enskinment, Tohaje's corrupted third skin, and the convergence itself. The first to complete would receive the alignment's full amplification. The other 2 would be burned away. The chamber door opened. Zuera stepped through first. The smock detonated, not gradually, but with the full-force explosion of an encoding sequence designed to survive its author's death. The encoding frequency filled the chamber like floodwater. The walls lit up. The genealogy carved into the ceiling blazed amber. The dais hummed. The door was open. The mechanism was active. Tohaje's trap fired. The web of corrupted frequencies activated with machine precision. The innermost ring closed around the chamber's perimeter. The second ring sealed the floor. The third ring lunged at Zuera's blazing smock. The encoding was captured, the web trying to digest it, to redirect it through the trap's architecture into Tohaje's third skin. But Mariama's shield choked the web's processing capacity. The capture mechanism strained, vibrating with the effort of containing a signal too vast for rapid processing. The calibration window opened. 3 seconds. The web held the encoding frequency and searched for the other 3, shadow binding, communion channel, unified knowledge, that it needed to complete the capture. Kofi sent the signal. Through the geological substrate, beneath the system's register, traveling through plain stone. A frequency from below. Now. WuDon opened the channel. Full aperture. Maximum depth. The communion key's anchor holding her consciousness to the surface while her mind became a conduit for the Zagale's accumulated frequency. Amber light exploded through the chamber floor. From every direction. 47 nodes blazing simultaneously, the root line network lighting up like a circuit at full power. The chamber was flooded, not with light, but with the Zagale's voice. The frequency of beings who had maintained the system for millennia and screamed into a void for decades and were now speaking at full volume through a young woman whose nose was bleeding and whose body was shaking. Samini caught her. The old Tindana's arms wrapped around his apprentice as the channeling force hit her body like a physical blow. His communion wrapped around hers, not deep enough to share the load, but strong enough to anchor. The trap reacted. The capture rings tried to close around the communion, but it was entering from everywhere. The rings spun, recalibrated, failed. The trap was designed for a point source. WuDon had given it a flood.
Azindor.
Kofi said.
Bridge now.
Azindor's shadow detonated. The bridge, strengthened over a week of daily practice, supercharged by the alignment, activated at full power. His shadow was no longer a bridge. It was a force of nature. It tore through the corrupted copy's false pattern like a blade through rotting cloth. And then the bridge cracked. The sound was inside his skull, a fracture running through the connection like a fault line splitting bedrock. The alignment's thousand-fold amplification, which had supercharged the bridge, was also tearing it apart. Too much power through too narrow a channel. His shadow binding had been designed for diagnostics, for careful reads of the system's boundary. Not for this. Not for carrying 1,000 ancestors' voices through a single man's consciousness. Azindor screamed. The pain was not metaphorical. It was the physical sensation of his nervous system conducting frequencies that human tissue was never meant to carry. His spine burned. His fingers went numb. His vision fractured into overlapping geometries. The chamber, the root line network, the sealed nodes, 1,000 years of chiefly succession, all visible simultaneously, all pressing against his awareness with the weight of stone. The bridge was failing. The crack widened. Through the growing gap, the corruption surged back, Tohage's false pattern rushing into the breach like water through a crack in a dam, trying to reseal the real skin beneath. If the bridge broke completely, the corruption would re-establish itself. The convergence would fail. They would lose everything. He could let go, release the bridge, save himself, try again in 7 years at the next alignment. The pain would stop. The ancestors' voices, that crushing, beautiful, unbearable pressure, would fade to silence. Azindor held. Not because he was strong enough. He was not. The bridge was failing and his body was breaking, and the pain was a white-hot wire threaded through every bone in his skeleton. He held because the ancestors were not just voices. They were presences. 1,000 chiefs across 1,000 years, and they were holding with him, pouring their accumulated authority into the cracking bridge, reinforcing it with the weight of every decision they had ever made, every sacrifice they had ever offered, every breath they had ever drawn in service of the bond. They were not going to let him go. They had waited 14 months for a legitimate custodian, and they would burn him alive before they let the corruption steal them again. The bridge held, barely. The crack sealed not cleanly, not completely, but enough. The pain did not stop. It settled into a steady agony that throbbed with each heartbeat, that tasted of iron and old ash that aged him in the seconds it persisted. He could feel it happening. The cost. Something leaving his body, not blood, not breath, but time. The bridge was consuming years he had not yet lived, burning his future to fuel the ancestors' passage. The real Enskinment skin spoke. Not in frequency. Not in geometric language. In voice. The compressed voice of 1,000 chiefs speaking simultaneously, their ancestral authority focused through the alignment's amplification into a single word that resonated through every bone in Azindor's body, and through the shadow that connected him to them, and through the chamber's stone walls. Bond. The Enskinment bond completed. The real skin reached for Azindor through the torn corruption and found his shadow waiting, the full-force embrace of a bond that had been interrupted and was now completing itself with the inevitability of a river reaching the sea. Azindo felt the ancestors, not as impressions, as presences. 1,000 chiefs, their voices joined in the ancestral line, their authority and wisdom flowing through the bond and into his shadow, and through his shadow into the boundary mechanism. The Enskinment activated, not the corrupted version, the original design. And Kofi and Pogna, Zara played the duet. 2 conductors, 2 lines. Kofi's primary through the system's frequencies, the improvised sequence, reordered and retimed to avoid the trap's capture pattern. Zara's counterpoint through the earth bond, traveling through the geological substrate that the trap could not monitor. Then Kofi's primary line faltered. Azindo felt it through the bridge, a stutter in the conducting frequency, a moment where the reformed mind's precise architecture missed a beat. The trap had adapted. Tohage's web, built by a man who had spent 20 years studying the system, was learning from the duet's pattern. The capture field shifted, not to the old frequencies, but to the new ones. The improvised sequence was being decoded in real time. The trap was closing on Kofi's conducting line. For 3 terrible seconds, the duet collapsed into a solo. Zara's counterpoint through the earth continued, steady and deep, but alone it was not enough. The reunion harmonic required both lines. Without Kofi's system frequency primary, the convergence was incomplete, a chord missing its highest note, a song with no melody. Kofi improvised. The scavenger who had never followed a prescribed path abandoned the sequence entirely. No structure. No mathematical precision. He played by ear, channeling the reformed mind's vast knowledge not as a composition, but as a conversation, responding to the trap's adaptations in real time, slipping through capture fields the way he had once slipped through market crowds, finding the gaps that precision could not predict because they existed only in the moment. His bad knee buckled. Azindo saw it through the bridge, Kofi staggering, catching himself on the wall, his body failing to keep pace with his mind's demands. The conducting was not just mental, it was physical. Every frequency he channeled passed through his nervous system, and his nervous system was housed in a body that had never been adequate. The protocol had rebuilt his mind and left his body exactly as it was, marginal, imperfect, human. Kofi kept playing, on one leg, with his palm flat against the wall for support. The improvisation was ragged and brilliant and desperate and exactly enough. The trap collapsed. Not dramatically. The web simply ceased to function. Its capture rings, built from the Zagale's medium, had been listening to the reunion harmonic. The communion flood from below, the duet's cooperative signal, the true Enskinment's ancestral authority, and the medium made its choice. It chose the system. The obsidian rings dissolved. The crystallized anchors melted back into the root line network. The trap's components returned to the body they had been stolen from. Tohage emerged from the shadows, not stepping out but being expelled, the shadows rejecting him as the system's reunification overwhelmed his third skin's hold on the shadow-binding fragment. His obsidian half was shattering, not from external force, from internal rejection. The living stone was fracturing because the reunified system had no port for a concentration mechanism. The Zagale's architecture was designed for 4 fragments, distributed, connected. Tohage's single-vessel model was architecturally incompatible. He fought. Even as the obsidian cracked, Tohage's human hand clawed at the corruption's remains, trying to hold the pieces together, feeding his own life force into the disintegrating third skin. His flesh hand bled where the obsidian edges cut him. His teeth were bared, not a villain's snarl, but the grimace of a man watching his life's work shatter between his fingers.
"You cannot,"
Tohage said. His voice was breaking, the harmonic splintering into discordance as the stone fell away in sheets.
"I was the only one who saw what the system needed. I was the only one willing to pay."
The obsidian around his left eye cracked off, and for the first time in 20 years, his whole face was visible. Both eyes, both brown, both wet.
"I believed I was right."
He whispered, not to anyone, to the stone falling from his body, to the system rejecting him.
I believed I was the cure.
The cure does not get to choose whether the patient accepts it.
Pogna Zara said, still conducting her counterpoint through the bedrock with the steady certainty of 43 years of earth knowledge.
That is the difference between medicine and poison. Consent.
The reunification reached its crescendo. The 4 fragments interlocked through the true Enskinment's ancestral bond. The frequencies merged into a chord, a 4-part harmony that resonated through the chamber and down through the root lines and across the shadow bindings of every soul in the territories. The chord was the Zagale's original design, distributed, connected, whole. The sound of what the world's magic was supposed to be, heard for the first time in a millennium. Every person in the chamber, defender and cage maker alike, felt it in their bones. Tohaje's third skin shattered completely. The obsidian fell away, revealing the human skin beneath, older, lined, carrying 20 years of ambition's toll. Without the concentration mechanism, Tohaje was what he had always been. A man who was told he was not enough and decided to become too much. He fell among the obsidian fragments. The stone was inert now, sharp and beautiful and completely powerless. The alignment's peak passed. The cosmic energy began its long decline. The root lines pulsed with clean frequency for the first time in 14 months. WuDon closed the communion channel gently. Samini's arms still held her. Her nose was bleeding freely, her body trembling, her ears ringing with a high, thin tone that would not stop. She pressed her palms against Samini's arm and felt his heartbeat, distant, muffled, as though her hearing had been wrapped in wet cloth. The Zagale's frequency had burned through her auditory pathways. The Earth's voice, which she had been hearing with crystalline clarity since the communion key, was muffled to a murmur. For a Tindana, it was like losing color from the world. She did not tell anyone. Not yet. The loss was too fresh, too frightening. She pressed closer to Samini and let his warmth anchor her in a world that had gone suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. Zueta held the smock, Mariama's final work. Quiet now. The smock was just a smock, but the love that had woven it was in the chamber's walls now, part of the permanent architecture. Tibijia sheathed his weapon. The soldier had noticed everything, and what he had noticed was this. Sometimes the most important thing a man with a sword can do is stand guard and let the music happen. But he was shaking. His forearms burned where the encoding frequency had caught him during Zueta's shield activation, a searing brand of magical resonance pressed into flesh that had no magic of its own. The skin was raised in welts, red and blistered, tracing the geometric patterns of Mariama's cipher across his muscles. He pulled his sleeves down. He would look at them later. Later, when the others were not watching. Azindo stood at the dais. The real Enskinment skin lay beneath his hands, open, alive, bonded. The ancestral voice of 1,000 chiefs humming through his shadow with the steady certainty of a heartbeat. His hair had gone white. Not silver, white, the absolute absence of pigment that comes from burning. He had not seen it yet, would not see it until morning, but the others saw. They looked at him and then looked away because the man standing at the dais looked a decade older than the one who had descended the ceremonial steps an hour ago. He was not a chief. He was not a king. He was a custodian, someone who held a piece of the system because the system needed someone to hold it, and the holding had cost him. The Damba drums beat on above them. The city danced, unaware that the world's magical infrastructure had been rebuilt beneath their feet by 4 strangers and 2 conductors, and a song that almost killed them all. Kofi slid down the wall and sat on the chamber floor. His bad knee was finished, not stiff, not sore, but ruined. Something had torn during the improvisation, something deep in the joint that would never heal properly. He probed it with careful fingers and felt the grinding of bone against bone where cartilage had been. The protocol's final lesson, conducting costs the body. The mind survives, the flesh remembers. He looked at his knee. He looked at the chamber full of exhausted, damaged, victorious people. He smiled, a small, tired, honest smile.
Worth it.
He said to no one. The cage was broken. The music was free, and every person who had played it bore the marks of the playing in white hair, in burned arms, in muffled hearing, in a ruined knee. The convergence had demanded a price, and they had paid it in the only currency the system accepted: their own bodies. The price was permanent, and it was worth it,